transitioning. And the only copy was an onion skin that I had in my desk. So my boss went back and said there's no official record of it. Well, somebody else found out the 3rd Air Force had a copy. Well, Pete Bent, a good personal friend of mine, was the acting 3rd Air Force commander, called me and he said, "Hey, Chuck, I've got a copy of this memo. We're going to have to release it." I said, "Please, burn it. Your life and mine will never be the same. You and I don't need this." Well, need I say more? The tape came out, unbeknownst to me. The memo came out, and a lot of publicity. But the event certainly happened. Now, some things have happened since then. I was very innocent at the time and believed what I was told. I asked the OSI if they had an interest, and I was told, no, not at all. Wrong. I found out later that the airmen were, how shall I say, pretty harshly interrogated that were involved. I have never been debriefed. I also found out later that the tower operator, both the tower operators at Bentwaters saw an object and picked it up on their Bright 2 radar and watched it. I found out that the tower operator in the weapons storage area actually saw something, as did a comm man who was working there and saw it go down into the forest near us. And also several other people around the base saw it. It's kind of interesting. What did we see? I have no idea what we saw that night. I do know it was under intelligent control, and in my personal opinion, it was either from another dimension or extraterrestrial.
Good afternoon. My name is Gerome Nelson. From 1962 to 1965, I was an Atlas F ICBM Deputy Missile Combat Crew Commander, assigned to the 579th Strategic Missile Squadron in Roswell, New Mexico. Sometime during the winter of 1963 through 1964, while I was on alert duty in the Launch Control Center at Atlas Site 9 west of Roswell, my topside security guard called me on the telephone and reported a bright light that is a fully illuminated round object was hovering silently over the missile silo and shining a light down onto it. I could tell that he was serious, and his voice revealed he was very frightened. After perhaps 5 minutes, the object left the vicinity. Even before it left, I called the base command post at Walker Air Force Base and reported the incident. I was concerned the object would somehow sabotage the missile. I was surprised by the response I received, being told that the command post would take on the unauthorized excursion under advisement. I was never debriefed by my commander or anyone else, which I found quite puzzling and frustrating. Over the next month or so, this type of incident occurred several more times while I was on duty at Site 9. I would estimate the total number as more than 3, but fewer than 10. On each occasion, I would call the command post, but each time my report was met with the same apparent indifference. During each of these incidents I witnessed, the guard would call the Launch Control Center and report the UFO. Several guards were involved over time and were all obviously frightened by the object hovering over the site. Their voices were actually trembling. Because of my duties in the Launch Control Center, I could not go topside and look at the objects myself. Only decades later did I learn that at least one missile facility technician, Bob Kaplan, had been ordered to report to the Office of Special Investigations on base and make a report about the similar incident he had witnessed at Site 9 during the period. At the time, this development was kept from me and my missile commander. I do not know whether anyone else was interviewed by the OSI, but I wasn't. That's my report.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Patrick McDonough, and I'm here today to relate an experience that happened to me in September of 1966. It's 44 years ago. But that experience was so significant, it was basically burned in my memory. I haven't forgotten about it at all. But I am getting older, and I did want to put this experience and relate it on the record. A little background on me: I had enlisted in the Air Force in Berkeley, California in first week of November 1962. At the onset of the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was going. I felt patriotic. And up to that time, I had been studying engineering in college. I had 3 years of engineering. And the Air Force, considering my background, trained me to be a geodetic surveyor. And I was assigned the 1381st Geodetic Survey Squadron in Orlando, Florida. We basically, in 1965, we moved to Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. On average, I would spend 9-10 months a year on temporary duty, surveying for latitude and longitude at our missile sites and aircraft bases for positioning missile and aircraft guidance systems. Basically, the squadron's mission was to provide precise geographical coordinates for a missile or an aircraft inertial guidance system, so that the missile or aircraft would know exactly precisely where it was at when it takes off, while the intelligence agencies would provide the targeting information. In early September of 1966, myself and 2 other airmen, Airman First Class Al Kramer and Airman Third Class Charlie Coates, we were temporarily assigned to Malmstrom Air Force Base, and were ordered to provide or perform the initial geodetic surveys for the last 50 missile sites there. There already was 150 Minuteman I sites, and we were putting in the last 50 for the wing. And basically, we were assigned to the Site Activation Task Force, they call SATAF. It was Boeing, really, the prime contractor. We were given a government truck, no radio, anything in it. I was the chief of party. I was the observer on our small 3-man team. Al was the recorder. Charlie was, we were trying to train him both in observing and recording. We normally would arrive at a missile site at about in early evening. We'd set up our instruments, and basically what I was doing was the star observation to provide precise latitude and longitude. On the night of this incident that happened, we were completing a series of what we call celestial astro-azimuth observations southeast of Conrad. And I was doing the observing, Al was recording, and Charlie was assisting Al with the chronometer on the time hacks as I tipped on Polaris. The unusual thing about this missile site I was at was that the blast hatch of the silo was open. And that was very unusual. Normally when I'd go to these missile sites, even though they were not activated yet with a missile, they were always closed. The monoliths were there. We do 4 monoliths and do a precise quadrangle. And the work we did was very precise. It involved a lot of, it was basically all using star shots. And so here's a site that we arrive at, and the blast hatch is open. And we're nearing completion of the star observations. We had been to the other 3 monoliths, and I was at the monolith at the next to the hatch. And it was probably about 1:30, and a unidentified flying object came from the north and stopped right over us. I would say it was Well, probably about altitude of 300 feet or so, maybe a little higher. It's a little hard to tell in the dark. It was round. It had, I would estimate its diameter at about 50 feet, kind of like a pretty large, like a wingspan of a B-52.